Thank you all for having me. It's really lovely to be here with you. And I'm going to kind of continue on a little bit from what I was doing with the leaders, which was just such a fun night. So if you were here, thank you for making it a great night. And one of the things I was talking about there was the power of questions. So I'm training to be a spiritual director at the moment, and that's a lot about asking good questions, searching questions. And so we were thinking together the other night, doesn't feel very long ago, about the power of questions. And we talked together about two questions, and I'll not embarrass any of you, but the first one was from Genesis, the questions that God asked, which was, where are you? And the second question we looked at was from Exodus, and it's when God says to Moses, what do you have in your hand? So I asked Ray, what should I speak on? And he gave me a topic and then went, oh, only joking, actually, except that the topic got in my head, and I'm not going to tell you what he told me, but somehow or other we're going to touch a little bit on that as we look together at the story of Jacob, and we're going to read together a passage. I'm not anticipating that you'll be able to see that, by the way. That's just to remind me what we're doing. I'm going to read together from Genesis chapter 32 and from verse 22. And I anticipate that for some of you this will be a familiar story. So Genesis 32, verse 22. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, let me go, for it's daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. The man asked him, what is your name? Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome. Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask my name? Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. The sun rose above him, and as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. So, here's our question for today. What is your name? What is your name? I may be asking this question quite a lot after the service today, of course. What is your name? But in this particular passage that we're looking at, there's a big question, which is who is asking this question? Who is asking this question? Well, it says, doesn't it, the man asked him. The man asked him. So is it just a man? Is it just a man who's turned up wrestling with Jacob and asking him his question? If we turn to Hosea chapter 12 and verse 4, it says this, he struggled with the angel and it overcame him. He wept and begged for his favor. So is it an angel? There's quite a lot of understanding that this is an angel of the Lord who is asking Jacob this question. So is it a man or is it an angel? And also some people think that it's a theophany. That'll be one of our big words for the morning. A theophany, an appearance of God, or even an appearance of Christ before he is incarnated on the earth. So is it the man, or is it the angel of the Lord, or is it actually the Lord himself who comes to Jacob and wrestles with him? I'll leave that one for you to decide. So here is our big question today. What's your name? Of course, this is a key cultural question right now, isn't it? A key cultural question around our identity. Who am I? What do I call myself? What do you call me? From whom or from where do I derive my sense of identity? And it'd be true to say that our identity changes through our lives. Initially, we identify ourselves mostly as a child, or a sister or a brother. And then later on we might identify ourselves more by our marriage status or our child status or our work status. And then life goes on and actually we enter some different senses of identity because some of those things change. We're just at the point where both our children have left home. So of course I'm still a mum, but actually my day-to-day identity doesn't look so much like that anymore. It's a key question for all of us at different times, isn't it? What's your name? Or who are you? What do you call yourself? What do other people refer to you as? I'm still trying to get used to being identified as a pastor. I've always called myself a minister. When people call me a pastor, I look over my shoulder to find someone else because I'm not kind of used to that. Identity. And there's all sorts of things about identity that we can reference here. Sometimes there's a case of mistaken identity, isn't there? I had a really embarrassing incident in a conference some years ago. One of the other ministers had stood up on the platform and shared about the fact that he'd just found out his son had been diagnosed with leukemia. So it was clearly a very important thing. I was hosting some of the conference, so I felt particularly kind of burdened that we should pray for him. And during the conference, I went up to this guy and I said, "Oh, how's things with your son?" And he said, "No, I'm not Nigel, I'm John." And I felt really embarrassed and awkward and said, "Oh, I'm really, really sorry," thinking, "Oh, you must just look a bit similar." Except that I didn't just do it once, I did it 3 times. 3 times. It's easy to mistake identity. We talk nowadays about identity theft, don't we? And we're all careful to shred all our documents and make sure we don't leave our personal data around in the whole GDPR thing that's come into our organizational structures, for better or worse, is all about identity theft. Sometimes we have a sense of losing our identity. I really used to notice it. I worked in the old organ loft of our church, and people would come up and I'd say, "Oh, hello, who is it?" And they say, "Oh, it's just me." I'm saying, "There's no just anything." People say, "Well, I'm retired." And I say, "Well, what have you retired from?" "Oh, well, I used to be But actually, there's a loss there, isn't there, in the sense of who I have called myself. Maybe you've had to give up something through accident or disability, and there's a loss there of the person that you felt that you were. And then, of course, there's a huge cultural story about identity confusion. But actually, that's more than just gender. Sometimes am I a mum? Am I a minister? Am I a this or that or the other? Who am I today? Lots of things. And at different times, we take on a kind of chameleon identity, which is, I will be like you because that will make me feel safer. And so I'm not sure who I am, so I'll just be like you. And I think that we see ourselves doing that, and that's not always a bad thing, because it enables us to fit into situations. But in that space, we can lose ourselves. I don't know a lot about Shakespeare. We did Macbeth once at school, but he wrote a little sonnet. He said this: "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." He asked that question, what's in a name? By the way, I promise we will get back to the passage in a moment. I wonder how many of you have come across the term nominative determinism. Is that familiar to anyone? Nominative determinism. You'll understand what it is in a moment. Here's an example. David Waterhouse, a houseboat owner. Or Alan Toogood, Samaritan volunteers, when your name is kind of what you do. Or Andrew Drinkwater, the Water Research Centre. Or Tom Kitchen, who of course is a famous chef. Dr. Pam Graves, archaeologist. Lieutenant Les McBurney of the Sun Prairie Fire Department. Christian Guy, Centre for Social Justice. Or maybe some of you will remember one of these. It was when we had a fuel shortage and everyone was queued up for miles apart. Phil McCann reporting from the petrol station, and Dr. Gavin Breeds. gynecologist and obstetrician. And then we have these funny names and book titles, don't we? Studying Nature by Teresa Green, or Falling Off a Cliff by Eileen Dover, Feeding a Dog by Nora Bone. And we know that names and their meanings in the Bible are very important, don't we? And in many of our churches now, we're starting to get a new accumulation of Old Testament names in our Sunday school classes. It used to be, more like Thomas and Andrew and Peter, and then there was a bit of a Joshua phase, and now we sort of have Ezekiel and Isaac and Noah's, and Elijah's very popular, isn't it? And, it's because these names have really significant meanings, and most of us, when we name our children, like to think about those kind of things. They're very important to us. And also we are very familiar with name changes in the Bible. And so we have Abram becomes Abraham, and Sarai becomes Sarah, and Jacob, who we'll look at, will become Israel, and Hoshea becomes Joshua, and Simon becomes Peter. And I guess that's what I've started to think about with regard to this passage about Jacob, because all these people's names were changed in one condition. Their names were changed in relation to their relationship to God. And that's left me thinking about this question, what's your name? Or who are you? And we're going back again to the passage, but it's left me thinking that our truest identity is found in our relationship with God. Everything else about our lives may change. The truth is that everything about our lives will change at different points along the trajectory. Except this is the one thing that can stay the same, that is always constant, that is unchanging. And the nature of our relationship with God may, and probably, hopefully does, change. But who we are, the truest identity of who we are, is found deeply in our relationship with God. What's in a name? Well, Jacob's whole life has been a struggle, hasn't it? You remember, won't you, his birth, twins coming out holding the heel of his brother Esau. His childhood, he was the second in the family, that everything came to Esau and nothing came by right to Jacob. It seemed that he was more of a kind of homebody, whereas his brother was the one that was always out in the fields and hunting for animals and was kind of rough, tough. That's not how you have the experience of Jacob. His whole life feels like it's been a bit of a struggle to work out who he is and where he fits in and how he belongs. He, along with his mum, has tried to make everything right for him, humanly speaking. So she guards him fiercely, she protects him fiercely. You definitely have the sense that Jacob is the favoured child for the mum. And so she's like, well, why don't we try and do this? Why don't we do this? And then, you can cheat your way to the success that you really want to have. And if you like, it feels like he's learned from his earliest days to live out his identity. One of the meanings of the name Jacob is deceiver. He can either deceive people by cheating, or he can fix things by his own hard work, whether it's his birthright or whether it's being married to the right person. He can kind of just keep on with his own human effort until things are resolved how he wants them to be. And of course, he's away from home, and then he goes to his uncle Laban's house, and he spots Rachel, and he thinks, well, she's the one. But she's not the first. Leah is. But he's not quite so keen on Leah. But then the trickster is tricked, isn't he? As Laban, I'm not sure that would work so much anymore because we're not so keen on veils and all that kind of stuff. But he finds himself married to Leah. He's like, well, okay, I can still fix this. If I just keep on working harder and harder, I can still fix this. And he does really, really well. He becomes very successful. He has wives. He has many children. He's wealthy. He has flocks of sheep and goats. But he's alienated from his family, and particularly from his twin brother Esau, who he's treated so poorly in the past. And he probably feels that he's been running away from for his whole life. And this becomes an absolutely key moment in Jacob's life, because he's got to this stage where everything is on his side. He's got everything he wants. He's successful. He's got everything. But he hasn't got that reconciled relationship with his brother. And so he hits this key moment and he sends a message to Esau. And he says, let's meet. Now, it wasn't as easy as it is now. You couldn't just WhatsApp or send an email or even a letter. I mean, as such, it would have been a long process of sending messengers, to Esau, waiting for them to come back again, and then setting out. So this whole process has taken a really long time, and all the while, I'm sure in Jacob's heart has been churning away. What's going to happen? What's he going to say? What's he going to be like? I have so harmed him, he has every right to harm me. And so when we get to this passage in Genesis chapter 32 and verse 22, by the ford of Jabbok, this is a critical moment for Jacob. And I wonder what words might characterize Jacob's state there. We are reminded that he is alone because he sends a lot of the family and tribes and flocks and herds away. He's on his own there. And he's waiting. And he doesn't know how long it's going to be because no one can send him a message, say, ETA, 2 days. He's just waiting. And waiting's really hard when you don't know what's going to happen. Waiting is even harder when you're fearful of what is going to happen. He's vulnerable because he hasn't got everyone around him to defend him. And I imagine that he is afraid. I wonder if any of those words characterize how you feel today. Because they've certainly characterized how I feel from time to time. Sometimes you feel very isolated, don't you? And alone. I think often we find ourselves in spaces where we are waiting without the knowledge of when the answer will come. I'm sure that we all feel vulnerable at times. I'll not get you to put your hand up because that would make you feel vulnerable. And we feel afraid because we're human, and fear is something that we feel and experience. I think we can identify a little bit with how Jacob is in this moment. And as he is there, he is attacked by a stranger in the dark. Okay, I hope that no one's had that experience because you're probably being re-traumatized at this point if you have. But Jacob is there, he is attacked by a stranger in the dark, and the stranger begins to wrestle with him. And they wrestle through the night. I mean, I can't even imagine what that is like how much energy that takes, how long it feels, how exhausting. And we have it, it's so intimate, isn't it? They hold hand to hand. It's combat. The kind of wrestling that you may or may not like to watch. I don't know. I'll make no comment about that. But it's hand to hand. It's two people. And it's a struggle. And you can see that no one is easily winning this battle. It's a really equitable struggle between the two of them. And it takes time and it's exhausting. And it's exhausting. And the man said, or the angel, or the Lord himself said, let me go, for it's daybreak. All the hours of the night have gone. Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me." And the man asked him, what's your name? Yeah, it strikes me that when God comes to us and he wrestles with us through some of the experiences of our lives, that there's a moment of intimacy in that sometimes doesn't feel that way. Does that make sense to you? Sometimes when you go through the darkest, most difficult things, when you're wrestling with God, and you're saying, "What is this all about, God? What are you doing here? I don't understand it. It's confusing. It's taking too long. I've been waiting. It hurts." Can we stop now? There's actually the same moment that God is his closest to you. Because there's an intimacy in those moments that there isn't always when things are easy and light and straightforward. Does that make sense? And perhaps if we can put that lens over the experiences we have in our own lives, and it may be in your own heart with things that you're dealing with, it may be in your family or in your workplace or even within the church. When we're wrestling with those things, God is actually his closest to us, not his most distant. A little while ago now, I was sorting stuff out as we were moving house. And I don't know about you, especially the men, but I have a box of necklaces. And they're things I've accumulated over the years. And I don't wear very many of them, to be truthful, but they're there. And I pulled them all out, and it was just like a mass, don't know how else to describe it, a mass of chains of different colours and types and styles. And I put them all onto my bed, and I started trying to untangle them. And it took hours, it literally took hours before I could even get to a point of deciding what I wanted to keep and what was going to go. But in that moment, it felt like God really spoke to me and just went, "You see, this is what I do with you. When you're all tangled up and in a mess, I don't just grab the one at the outside and yank it away, and then some are broken. I sit down and we work through this, and I take this apart, and I unravel this bit, and we wrestle with this. And there's an intimacy in this because you matter to me." I did that because some of those necklaces mattered to me. I didn't want to just go, "Oh, never mind." God does it with us because we matter to him. And Jacob said, "My name is Jacob." And the angel said, "You will be called Israel," of course the name of the nation, "because you have struggled with God and with men." Oh, there's another little indication there, isn't there? "And have overcome." But you know, there was evidence, wasn't there, of that struggle? It wasn't easy. Evidence of the encounter that enabled him to receive his true God-given identity. And maybe that's our experience. Because when we go through the tough things, we carry the scars, don't we? Even Jesus carries the scars. Even Jesus. And Jacob carried them in a dislocated hip, which continued to be a limping hip for him for the rest of his life. And maybe if I was to go around the room, and don't worry, I won't do that, you would be able to say, "This is my scar. This is a space which is hard, and there was brokenness. And I wrestled with the Lord in it. And then here I am now, and he has remade me. He has given me a new identity. He has transformed the thing that was really hard and broken. But here's my scar, because it cost me. It cost me." And Jacob carried that scar with him. When we're in the struggling, it's hard to see the face of God behind our struggles always, isn't it? I find it hard to see the face of God behind all my struggles. And sometimes waiting for daybreak to come feels like an awfully long time with certain things we're dealing with in our lives, doesn't it? But Jacob was able to say at the end of that, I'm going to call this place Peniel, because here I have seen the face of God. And my prayer for you today is that in that moment where there's something going on that is costly with who you are, something about your life, something that's causing you pain, and to doubt what God might be doing, that to encourage you that he is doing something, and that there will come a moment where you are able to say, in this place, I have seen the face of God. I wonder if any of you ever feel that you've seen a glimpse of the beautiful face of Jesus. Maybe it's been in a moment of worship. Maybe it's been as you've taken scripture and God's word by his Spirit slept alive to you. Maybe it's been in the embrace of a friend or the silent moment of prayer, and you've glimpsed something of the face of God. Because you know what Jacob sought to escape, he now embraces. First of all, he's attacked by a stranger. I'm sure he did everything to overpower him, make him go away. Now the stranger says, let me go, and Jacob says, no. Isn't that funny? The very thing that first of all he wanted to escape, he now embraces, because he recognizes that God is at work. And his name confesses his identity. He says, my name is Jacob. I've lived my whole life as Jacob. I've tried to cheat. I've tried to work my way through. I've done it on my own. I haven't wanted to follow your law for my life. Now I'm Israel, the one who has struggled with God. Do you want to be known as someone who struggled with God? I'm not sure it's our first choice, right? I think maybe, loved God, or full of the joy of the Lord, or messenger of hope. I'm sure there's some nicer names, right? The one who struggled with God. And yet we see something in people who have struggled with God that is beautiful, because it's costly. And God has done his work. I'm nearly done. I wonder how many of you ever read a book, I read it as a teenager, called Hind's Feet on High Places. Anybody read that book? There's a few of you. You should read it. I mean, it's old, but it's great. And there's a person in the book, and her name is Much Afraid. And the great shepherd comes to her, and he says, we're going to go up on the mountains. And she says, no, I can't, because I'm much afraid. I can't do that. I can't walk that path. I can't go with you. I can't trust you. And eventually she does take the hand of the great shepherd. And I won't ruin the whole story for you, but she goes with him onto the mountains. Well, I will ruin it, actually. And as she reaches the high places with the great shepherd, he says, I'm going to give you a new name. And your new name is going to be Grace and Glory. It says in Romans chapter 8, the Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. It says in Revelation that we will be given a white stone with a new name on it that no one else knows. Quite excited about that. Quite excited about that. We have a name that is given to us from the Lord himself. Like a few moments ago I said that our truest identity is in our relationship with Jesus. See, because what been thinking about recently is that the key question is not what is your identity, but where is it? Not what is it, because that is changeable. But where is it? Where is your identity? This morning I had a WhatsApp message on my phone, and it's from a very dear friend of mine. She's not even 50 yet, and her husband is about to go into the presence of Jesus forever. He is a comedian, he's an evangelist, he's a husband, he's a dad, and he's a son of the living God. And that bit will never change. And whether it's today or whether it's tomorrow, it will be soon. He will be more alive than ever as a child of the King of Kings in the presence of Jesus. Because the what bit for him will fade away. But the where will continue more brightly, more truly, because when we see him, we will be like him. It's my favourite verse in the whole entire Bible. When we see him, we will be like him. So it may be that the question that lots and lots of people are asking on all sorts of different levels is what? But actually the answer is where. Because our identity is most truly found in our relationship with the Lord, who loves us unconditionally, who loves us for everlasting, who knows everything about us, the shiny on the outside stuff and the slightly messy on the inside stuff, who holds us and keeps us and guards us, and who does his work in us to change us from one degree of glory to another, and the polishing and sorting out a bit painful at times, so that one day we may be in his presence and fully united with him face to face.